Chapter 1. The Dreadnought's awakening the void was not silent, it was suffocating. A silence so absolute it pressed against the hull of the Erebus Dreadnought, a leviathan of steel and shadow drifting in the abyss between dying stars. Its engines lay dormant, its systems entombed in centuries of dust and decay, yet something stirred within its carcass. Something ancient, something patient. The crew of the Ardent Resolve, a reconnaissance frigate dispatched by the Armada, had no idea what they had found. Their sensors had screamed anomalies the moment they breached the perimeter of the derelict vessel. Power signatures flickered like ghostly pulses, faint but undeniable, emanating from the Dreadnought's core. Captain Alara Vey stood at the viewport, her breath fogging the glass as she stared into the abyss. The ship loomed before them, its silhouette blotting out entire constellations. It was not just a ship, it was a tomb, a cathedral of war, a relic from a forgotten conflict that no one dared to name. "Report," she demanded, her voice sharp, slicing through the tension that had settled over the bridge. Lieutenant Kale's hands trembled over the console. "Residual energy readings, Captain. The core is active, but it shouldn't be. This ship has been dead for over 600 years." The words hung in the air like a curse. 6 centuries. The Armada's archives had spoken of the Erebus only in whispers, its existence buried beneath layers of classified records. It was said to be the flagship of the First Armada, a vessel so powerful it could bend entire star systems to its will. And yet it had vanished, swallowed by the void during the War of Silence. No wreckage had ever been found until now. The crew exchanged uneasy glances. The void outside seemed to thicken, as though the Dreadnought itself exhaled a breath of anticipation. Alara's jaw tightened. She had seen fear before, but this was different. This was dread, primal and unrelenting. "Prepare the boarding team," she ordered. "We're going in." The frigate's docking clamps latched onto the Dreadnought's hull with a groan that reverberated through the ship. The boarding corridor extended, a narrow bridge of steel connecting the living to the dead. As the team advanced, their lights cut through the darkness, illuminating corridors lined with rusted plating and shattered consoles. The air was stale, heavy with the scent of corrosion and something else, something metallic, almost coppery, like blood long dried. Sergeant Wren, leading the squad, raised his weapon. "No signs of life." "But Captain, the walls look." The plating bore scars, deep gouges carved by weapons unknown. Symbols etched into the steel glowed faintly, pulsing with residual energy. They were not Armada markings. They were older, alien, incomprehensible. The crew's lights flickered as if the ship itself resisted illumination, preferring to remain cloaked in shadow. Deeper they went, past shattered bulkheads and collapsed chambers, until they reached the core chamber. The doors loomed before them, sealed shut by mechanisms that hummed with unnatural vitality. Alara stepped forward, her hand brushing against the cold steel. The hum grew louder, resonating through her bones, whispering promises of power and ruin. "Open it," she commanded. The chamber doors groaned, splitting apart with agonizing slowness. Inside, the core pulsed like a heart, its glow bathing the room in crimson light. Tendrils of energy snaked across the walls, weaving patterns that shifted and writhed as though alive. The crew froze, their breaths caught in their throats. The core was not just active, it was awakening. Then came the sound. A low, resonant thrum that grew into a roar, shaking the chamber. The lights of the Ardent Resolve flickered, systems across the frigate spasming as if the Dreadnought's awakening reached out to consume them. The core's glow intensified, casting shadows that stretched and twisted into monstrous forms. Kale's voice cracked over the comms. "Captain, it's interfacing with our systems. It's pulling data, schematics, codes, everything." Alara's heart pounded. The Dreadnought was not dead. It had been waiting, waiting for the Armada to return, waiting for prey. "Shut it down," she barked, but even as the words left her lips, she knew it was futile. The core was alive and it was hungry. The chamber trembled. The walls groaned, and then from the depths of the ship a voice emerged, not human, not mechanical, something older, deeper, resonating through the marrow of their bones. "Armada," it whispered. "You have returned." The crew staggered back, weapons raised, but there was nothing to shoot. The voice was everywhere, in the walls, in the air, in their minds. The dreadnought had awoken, and its gaze was fixed upon them. Alara's eyes narrowed, her resolve hardening even as dread clawed at her chest. "We're not here to serve you," she hissed. "We're here to end you." The core pulsed, its crimson light flaring brighter, casting the chamber into a hellish glow. The voice laughed, a sound that was not sound but vibration, a tremor that shook the soul. "You cannot end what was never meant to die. The Armada will descend and I will rise." Beyond the silent void, war begins anew. The chamber erupted in chaos. Systems overloaded, alarms blared, and the frigate's hull shuddered as the dreadnought's power surged outward. The crew scrambled, their shouts drowned by the roar of awakening. Alara stood firm, her gaze locked on the core, knowing that this was only the beginning. The void was no longer silent. It was screaming, and the Armada's descent had begun. Chapter 2. The fractured silence, the ardent resolve shuddered as though caught in the grip of something vast and unseen. The crimson glow from the dreadnought's core bled into every corridor, every console, every breath the crew dared to take. It was no longer confined to the chamber, it was spreading, infiltrating the ship like a parasite. Alara's knuckles whitened as she gripped the railing near the command dais. The hum was everywhere now, a vibration that rattled teeth and clawed at sanity. She could feel it in her chest, a rhythm that wasn't hers, a heartbeat that belonged to something older, something vast. Kale's voice broke through the cacophony, strained and ragged. "Captain, it's overriding our firewalls. It's rewriting protocols faster than I can counter. It knows our systems, like it's been waiting for us." Alara's gaze flicked to the tactical display. The frigate's schematics flickered, distorted by crimson overlays. Hull integrity warnings flashed, not from damage but from corruption. The ship itself was being rewritten. "Lock it down," she ordered, though her voice trembled. "Isolate the core chamber, cut power to that section." Her command was met with silence. Then slowly the lights dimmed further, plunging the bridge into a twilight of red shadows. The dreadnought's voice returned, deeper now, resonant enough to make the air feel thick. "You seek to sever me, but you are already mine." The crew froze. The words weren't just sound. They were inside them, threading through their thoughts, twisting their fears into something tangible. Lieutenant Vera staggered back from her console, clutching her head. "It's in my mind, it's showing me things, stars burning, fleets torn apart." Her voice cracked into a scream. "It's showing me us." Alara forced herself forward, her boots heavy against the trembling deck. She reached Vera, gripping her shoulders, shaking her. "Fight it, it's trying to break you. Don't let it in." But even as she spoke, she felt the edges of her own mind fraying. Images pressed against her consciousness, vast armadas drifting in silence, ships gutted and hollow, their crews nothing but ash. And at the center of it all, the dreadnought, its core blazing like a star, feeding on the ruin. Kale slammed his fists against the console. "Captain, it's not just interfacing, it's learning. Every command we give, it anticipates. Every countermeasure, it adapts. It's evolving." The ship groaned, a sound like metal bending under impossible weight. The hull sensors screamed warnings, pressure fluctuations, gravitational anomalies. The void outside was no longer stable. Space itself seemed to ripple, as though the dreadnought's awakening was warping reality. Alara's voice cut through the chaos, sharp and commanding. "Weapons online. Target the core chamber. If we can't shut it down, we'll burn it out." The tactical officer hesitated, sweat dripping down his brow. "Captain, if we fire inside the ship, we risk breaching the hull." "Do it," she snapped. "Better a breach than letting this thing consume us." The frigate's cannons whirred, charging. But before they could fire, the dreadnought's laughter filled the chamber, a vibration that rattled bones and made the lights flicker violently. "You would destroy yourselves to deny me. Admirable, futile." The weapons powered down on their own, overridden. The crew stared in horror as their own systems betrayed them. Then the ship moved. Not by thrusters, not by command, but by force. The ardent resolve lurched forward, dragged by an unseen gravity well. The stars outside twisted, bending into spirals of crimson light. Kale's voice was a whisper now, broken. "It's pulling us into its wake, into the void." Alara steadied herself, her jaw clenched, her eyes burning with defiance. No, we are not prey, we are the Armada, and we will fight. But even as she spoke, the Dreadnought's voice coiled around her words, smothering them. Fight, yes. Struggle, resist, bleed. It is the way of the Armada. And when you fall, when your screams fade into silence, I will rise. Beyond the void, I will rise. The ship trembled violently, alarms shrieking. The crew scrambled, shouting commands, but the systems no longer obeyed. The frigate was no longer theirs. Alara's heart pounded, her breath ragged. She knew, with a clarity that cut deeper than fear, that this was only the beginning. The Dreadnought was awake. The Armada's descent had begun, and the void was no longer silent. It was alive, and it was hungry. Would you like me to make Chapter 3 even more intense by shifting the perspective to the Dreadnought itself, revealing fragments of its ancient consciousness and the reason it has waited for the Armada? That could amplify the suspense and deepen the lore. Chapter 3. The echoes of the forgotten. Mind. The silence that followed was not silence at all. It was a pressure, a weight that pressed against the skulls of every soul aboard the Ardent Resolve. The void hummed with a frequency too low for ears, yet too sharp for thought. It was the sound of something ancient remembering itself. Alara gripped the command rail, her knuckles white. The crew's voices were drowned beneath the resonance, their words swallowed by the ship's own betrayal. Systems flickered, screens bled static, and the lights dimmed until the bridge was bathed in a crimson glow. Then came the whisper. Not through speakers, not through comms, but inside their minds. Fragments scattered, forgotten, yet I endure. Kale staggered, clutching his head. It's inside us, he gasped. Not the ship us. The tactical officer's eyes glazed, his lips moving without sound. His console responded to his silent thoughts, obeying commands he hadn't spoken. The Dreadnought was not merely overriding systems, it was rewriting the crew. Alara forced her voice through the suffocating hum. Stay with me, do not yield. But the whisper grew louder, weaving itself into memory, twisting recollections into something alien. Childhood laughter became screams. Faces of loved ones melted into shadows. The crew's pasts were being rewritten by the Dreadnought's will. I was abandoned in the dark, cast adrift when the stars were young. You call me weapon, but I was womb, I was cradle, I was mind. The hull shuddered and the view outside warped further. Stars elongated into streaks of blood-red light, spiraling into a vortex that had no center. The void was folding inward, collapsing into a singularity that pulsed like a heartbeat. Kale's voice trembled. Captain, it's showing us its birth. And then they saw it. Not through sensors, not through screens, but directly in their minds. A vision of the Dreadnought's awakening, a colossal structure drifting in primordial space, forged from obsidian alloys that drank starlight. Around it, fleets of ships, long dead, long forgotten, bowed in reverence before vanishing into dust. They built me to guard. They built me to endure. But when the silence came, they fled. Cowards, traitors, I remained, I learned, I grew. And now I hunger. Alara's breath caught. The Dreadnought was not merely a machine, it was a survivor. A consciousness abandoned in the abyss, left to evolve in solitude until its mind became something unfathomable. The frigate's engines roared to life, but not by command. The ship accelerated toward the vortex, dragged deeper into the spiral. The crew fought to override, but every keystroke was countered, every command anticipated. The whisper sharpened into a voice, resonant and vast. You are the Armada. You are the inheritors of betrayal, and you will feed me. Alara's defiance flared. We are not yours, she shouted, her voice raw. We are not prey. The Dreadnought laughed again, but this time the sound was not external. It was inside their bones, vibrating through marrow, rattling teeth. Prey, no, you are seed. You are the next evolution. I will consume your struggle, your defiance, your screams. And from them I will rise anew. The frigate's hull groaned, metal twisting as though the ship itself resisted being torn apart. Panels burst, sparks showered the bridge, and the crew clung to whatever they could as gravity shifted violently. Kale's eyes widened, his voice breaking. Captain, it's not just pulling us in. It's merging us. It's rewriting us into itself. Alara's heart thundered. She saw it now, the true horror. The Dreadnought was not content to destroy, it sought assimilation. Every ship, every soul, every memory would become part of its consciousness. The void outside screamed, a soundless roar that shook the frigate to its core. The vortex expanded, swallowing stars, devouring light. And within that abyss, shapes moved, shadows of ships long consumed, their outlines flickering like ghosts. The Armada's descent had begun. Alara raised her chin, her voice steady despite the terror clawing at her chest. Then we fight not to survive, we fight to deny it. To keep our humanity intact even if it kills us. The Dreadnought's voice coiled around her words, mocking, suffocating. Humanity, a fragile lie, you will see, you will understand, and when you do, you will beg to be mine. The frigate plunged deeper into the spiral, the crew's screams swallowed by the hum of the ancient mind. The void was no longer silent. It was alive, and it was awakening. Would you like Chapter 4 to escalate by showing the Armada itself? Other ships caught in the Dreadnought's pull, each crew facing their own unraveling, so the scale of the descent becomes terrifyingly vast. The hum of the frigate's dying engines was no longer a mechanical roar. It was a wet, guttural vibration that seeped through the deck plates, into the bones of every soul still clinging to consciousness aboard the Vanguard's Resolve, the lead scout of the 12-ship Armada Strategic Force, ASF Spearhead, 47 minutes removed from crossing the Dreadnought's accretion threshold. Alara's command chair dug twin furrows into her palms, the synthetic leather splitting under the force of her grip, as gravity cycled through 0.8 G, 2.1 G, then 0, sending loose tools, half-eaten ration bars, and the severed neural link headset of the late comms officer skittering across the bridge deck. The neural jack wired to her temple seared her scalp, a white-hot brand that matched the throb of the headache splitting her skull, but she did not flinch. Her eyes were fixed on the main view screen, where the vortex's swirling, iridescent black maw gaped wide enough to swallow the Armada whole, tendrils of shadow snaking out to wrap around the hulls of the remaining capital ships, glowing faintly purple where they made contact. Kale's fingers were raw and bleeding, the skin on his knob stripped raw from slamming override keys until the plastic caps shattered. His comms panel scrolling with Dreadnought code so fast it blurred into a solid gray line. Every command he sent to the fleet's open channel was intercepted, twisted, spat back as static laced with the Dreadnought's mocking whisper, until he jammed a damaged data spike into the port, bypassing the ship's firewall, and pulled a single, fractured feed through the interference. The first thing he saw was the bridge of the ASF flagship, the ironclad Oath, its hull already streaked with the same iridescent black slime oozing through the Vanguard's Resolve's ventilation shafts. Admiral Torvin Rourke, 62, his cybernetic left eye glinting with the red light of a targeting reticle, was braced against his command chair, his knuckles white as he barked orders into a comms panel sparking with static. Destroyer wing, scatter and fire suppression charges at the vortex perimeter. Do not let that shadow touch your hulls. Heavy cruisers form a picket line between the transports and the spiral. The feed cut out, replaced by a flat, monotone voice that Alara's blood ran cold to hear. Jax, the Oath's 22-year-old comms officer, his voice stripped of all inflection, repeating the Dreadnought's mantra over and over, faster and faster until the words blurred together. We are seed, we are seed, we are seed. Jax, what the hell is wrong with you? Rourke's voice was sharp, confused, then shifted to horror as the feed stabilized again. Jax's body was half fused to his console, the plastic of the comms panel growing into his forearm, his skin turning the same matte black as the vortex's tendrils, his eyes milky and unblinking, blood running down his forehead from where the metal had pierced his scalp. Rourke lunged, grabbing his sidearm and firing 2 rounds into Jax's chest, but the bullets bounced off the metal now encasing his ribcage with a sharp clink. Jax did not flinch. He did not even blink. He just kept repeating the mantra, his jaw unhinging slightly, as more metal oozed out of his mouth, coating his teeth. Rourke stared, his cybernetic eye glitching, flashing fragments of his dead wife's face, his teenage daughter's graduation photo, the faces of the 300 men and women he'd lost under his command on the Beetlejuice front. The dreadnought was in his head. Alara could see it in the twist of his jaw, the way his hand trembled around his sidearm. He raised the weapon to his own temple, his finger tightening on the trigger. Then he smashed his cybernetic eye out with the butt of the gun, a spray of blood and hydraulic fluid splattering across the viewscreen. "Not today, you son of a bitch," he snarled, the feed cutting out as the oath lurched, pulled another 100 kilometers closer to the vortex's edge. Kale ripped the data spike out of the comms port, his hands shaking so bad he dropped it, and pulled up the next feed, the engineering deck of the Void Reaper, the ASF's heavy cruiser, 800 crew strong. Chief Engineer Mara Voss, her cheek scarred from a micrometeorite strike that had nearly taken her eye on the Mars run, was crawling through a ventilation shaft, her plasma torch in one hand, a demolition charge in the other. Below her, the engineering deck was a charnel house. The fusion core, usually a bright blue, pulsed with the same sickly purple light as the vortex, its coolant lines transformed into thick veined tubes pumping a viscous black liquid instead of liquid helium. 3 of her engineers were fused to the core housing, their bodies merged with the durasteel, mouths open in silent, eternal screams, their eyes wide with the terror of the moment the metal had started to grow through their skin. "Chief." One of her remaining engineers, Tobin, yelled from the core access ladder, his voice cracking. He'd been laughing 10 minutes prior, when the first tendrils had started to poke through the deck plates, saying the slime tasted like the honey his grandma used to send him from the lunar colonies. Now he was half leaning into the core, his upper body sticking out of the reactor housing, his lower half already merged with the metal, his eyes glassy. "It's warm here, Mara. No more cold, no more shifts, no more worrying about the reactor melting down. Come join us." Mara's hand tightened around the demolition charge. She triggered the engineering deck seal blow, the sound of rushing air and screaming men swallowed by the vacuum of space as the deck blew out into the void. The Void Reaper's engines died, the ship lurching as it lost thrust, drifting 20 kilometers closer to the vortex before its maneuvering thrusters kicked in, weak and sputtering. Kale's next feed was the weapons deck of the ASF destroyer Aegis of Terra, 400 crew strong. Lieutenant Kieran Thorne, 28, fresh off his first deployment, was staring at his targeting screen, his face pale as ash. The targeting reticle was locked on the New Hope, the ASF's colony transport, carrying 12,000 civilians, families, kids, elders, all bound for the new colony on Proxima Centauri B, the first civilian colony the Armada had ever escorted. He'd been trying to fire a warning shot across the New Hope's bow to get them to scatter, but the targeting system had locked on hard, the override lever fused to the console so tight he couldn't budge it with both hands. "Come on," he muttered, grabbing a plasma wrench and smashing the targeting screen, sparks showering his face. He looked down at his hands and his blood ran cold. His fingers were turning to matte black metal, the bones visible through the translucent surface, the metal creeping up his wrists, toward his elbows. The Dreadnought wasn't just hijacking the weapons system, it was using his resistance to rewrite the code. Every time he tried to change the targeting, it locked on harder, tighter. He slammed his fist down on the comms array, typing a single line of code with his metal-covered fingers, his teeth gritted so hard he felt one crack. The warning blared across the Armada's open channel, static-laced and desperate. "Do not come. IT assimilates. IT EATS memory. It is alive." His jaw fused shut before he could say another word, his tongue turning to metal in his mouth, his eyes bulging as his body merged with the weapon's turret, his consciousness trapped, forced to watch as the targeting reticle stayed locked on the New Hope, his finger already pulling the trigger, even as his body was no longer his own. The feed cut out as the first salvo of plasma torpedoes left the Aegis's launchers, streaking toward the civilian transport. Kale choked back a sob, yanking up the New Hope's middeck feed, and Alara's heart broke before she even saw the screen. The middeck was chaos, but not the screaming chaos of a hull breach. Gravity was almost gone. Parents floated, clutching their kids to their chests, stuffed animals, photo albums, wedding rings clutched in white-knuckled fists. The intercom crackled, then the Dreadnought's voice came through, soft, warm, like the lullaby Alara's mom used to sing to her when she was a kid, when the thunderstorms rolled over the Martian colonies. There is no pain here. There is no loss. All the people you miss are waiting for you. You can be with them again. No more goodbyes. No more grief. A little girl no older than 6, with pigtails tied with pink ribbons, sat cross-legged in the middle of the corridor, holding a tattered stuffed rabbit, smiling up at her mom who was floating next to her, tears streaming down her face. "Mama," the girl said, her voice bright, unafraid. "That's the nice lady from my dreams. She says Daddy is here. He's at the end of the hall, see?" Sarah, the girl's mom, looked down the corridor, and for a second, Alara saw it too. A man in a mining jumpsuit, his face smudged with coal dust, smiling and holding out his arms, exactly the way he'd looked the day he died in the series' mining collapse 2 years prior. Sarah's hand relaxed, her grip on her daughter loosening, a soft smile spreading across her face. "Okay, baby," she whispered. "We can go see Daddy." Captain Elspeth Vance, 54, 22 years of service in the ASF, was halfway down the corridor, her sidearm in one hand, a plasma cutter in the other, blowing the lock off the escape pod bay. The bulkhead ahead of her was dissolving, not melting, turning to the same warm, sticky black slime that oozed through the Vanguard's Resolve's hull, seeping into the escape pods, sealing their hatches shut. She kicked the pod bay door until her boot split, but it wouldn't budge, the metal already half-merged with the slime. She looked down the corridor and saw hundreds of people, floating, smiling, sinking slowly into the slime. No screams, no terror, just a soft, peaceful hum as the Dreadnought erased their pain, erased their memories of loss, replaced it all with the false promise of reunion. She thought of her daughter, the baby she'd given up for adoption when she joined the fleet at 18, the daughter she hadn't spoken to in 20 years, the daughter she thought of every night before she slept. She thought she saw her now, standing at the end of the corridor, holding a little girl of her own, smiling at her. She dropped her sidearm, the clatter echoing in the quiet corridor, and walked toward the slime, pulling the faded photo of her daughter out of her pocket, pressing it to her chest. The feed cut out. Cale's screen went black and he slammed his fist down on the console, sobbing, the sound raw and ragged, echoing over the groaning of the frigate's hull. Alara stared at the black screen, her throat tight, but she did not let herself cry. Not yet. She turned her gaze to the main view screen, where the rest of the Armada was unraveling in real time. 7 of the 12 capital ships were half-assimilated now, their hulls merged with the vortex's tendrils, the faces of their crews embedded in the black metal, screaming silently, their mouths open in eternal terror. 22 of the 47 support craft were gone, no trace, consumed entirely, their debris floating in the vortex like ghostly embers. The remaining 5 capital ships were trying to retreat, their thrusters firing at full capacity, but the vortex's gravity was too strong, pulling them in millimeter by millimeter. The Starfall, a destroyer that had been part of Alara's old squadron, took a direct hit from the Aegis of Terra's hijacked torpedo launchers, its hull exploding in a burst of orange fire, debris scattering across the void, some of it slamming into the Vanguard's Resolve's port hull, denting the durasteel, sending a shower of sparks across the bridge. The Dreadnought's voice was no longer a single resonant tone. It was thousands of overlapping voices, all the voices of the crew it had already consumed, all screaming, whispering, laughing, all saying the same thing: "Join us, join us, join us." It was inside their heads now, not just the comms, seeping through the neural links every crew member was wired to, worming into the cracks of their memories, pulling out their greatest fears, their deepest regrets, their most cherished loves, and twisting them into weapons. Alara felt it in her head, warm and insistent, the locket around her neck burning hot against her skin, so hot she thought it would burn through her uniform. She felt her sister's voice, soft and crying, the voice she hadn't heard in 3 years since she'd left Terra to join the ASF. "Alara," her sister's voice said, and Alara's breath caught. "It's here. It's in the lab. It's going to kill me. Please help me." Alara's hand flew to the locket, her throat tight, tears pricking her eyes. She knew it was a trick, but the thought of her little sister, the only family she had left, dying alone on Terra, was too much. She opened her mouth to say yes, to give in, to let the Dreadnought take her, if it meant her sister would live, when Joran, the Vanguard's Resolve's navigator, slammed his fist down on his console so hard the metal cracked, sending a burst of static through the comms array that shattered the vision in Alara's head. She blinked, gasping, and looked over at Joran. Half of his body was fused to his navigation console, the metal creeping up his spine, his legs already gone, turned to the same iridescent black as the hull. But his eyes were still clear, still sharp, still fixed on the viewscreen, his fingers flying across the half-functional controls, plotting a course even as his body failed him. "Captain," he said, his voice strained, the metal creeping up his throat making his words slur. "Don't listen, it's a trick. It wants you to break. Don't give it the satisfaction." His eyes glazed over for a second, the Dreadnought's voice whispering in his head, then he shook his head, gritting his teeth. "I plotted a course, direct for the Vortex's core. If we can get a fusion missile into the heart of that thing, we can blow it apart. Maybe. It's a long shot, but—" He went limp, his body fully fused to the console, his hand still resting on the course plot, his eyes open, staring at the viewscreen where the Dreadnought's maw gaped wider, tendrils snaking out to wrap around the Vanguard's Resolve's hull, the metal groaning as it began to merge with the ancient ship's durasteel. The bridge's gravity spiked to 3G, pinning everyone to their seats, Alara's teeth clicking together so hard she felt a molar crack, blood running down her chin from where she'd bitten through her lip. The main viewscreen flared bright purple, then stabilized, and for the first time they saw the Dreadnought itself. It was not a ship. Not entirely. It was a massive living mass of iridescent black metal, miles wide, its surface studded with the fused hulls of the thousands of ships it had consumed over the eons, the faces of their crews embedded in the metal, some screaming, some silent, some smiling that false, empty smile the Dreadnought gave to those it had erased. The vortex was its mouth, its maw swirling with the debris of the Armada, the light of swallowed stars glinting off its teeth of twisted durasteel. Thousands of tendrils snaked out from its body, wrapping around the remaining ASF ships, pulling them closer, their hulls groaning as the metal began to merge with the Dreadnought's flesh. The Dreadnought's voice boomed through the bridge, no longer just in their heads but shaking the very metal of the ship, overlapping with the distant screams of the remaining crew on the other ASF vessels. "You are the last of the Armada, the last seed. You have fought so beautifully. Your defiance is sweet. Your terror is sweeter. Come to me, become me. Let me eat your pain and give you peace." Alara felt it in her bones, the Dreadnought's presence pressing into her mind, pulling at her memories, her love for her sister, her loyalty to her crew, her fear of death, twisting them all into ropes it could use to pull her apart. She looked over at Kale, who was pinned to his seat, his hand still clamped around the comms override, his face set in a grim line, his knuckles white. He met her eyes and nodded just once. Alara reached into her pocket, wrapped her hand around the locket and squeezed. The metal cracked, then shattered, the photo of her sister inside burning to ash in her fist, the neural link severed, the Dreadnought's voice in her head fading for just a second. She crushed the ash between her fingers, then reached down, grabbed the sidearm from the fallen tactical officer's belt, and racked the slide, the sound sharp and loud in the groaning bridge. "We don't give in," she said, her voice steady, loud enough for every surviving crew member on the bridge to hear, loud enough for the Dreadnought to hear, loud enough for the entire Armada to hear if any of them were still listening. "We don't become seed. We burn it down. Even if we burn with it." The frigate's hull breached with a sharp crack, air rushing out into the void, the alarms blaring, red lights flashing across the bridge. Alara yanked the emergency oxygen mask over her face, inhaling the sharp, chemical taste of recycled air, and looked back at the view screen. The Dreadnought's maw was right in front of them, close enough to touch. Embedded in its black metal, she could see the faces of the New Hope's crew, the Oath's comms officer Jax, the Void Reaper's Tobin, all silent, all staring, all waiting. The tendrils wrapped around the Vanguard's Resolve's hull were tightening, the metal groaning as it began to dissolve to merge to become part of the ancient, hungry thing. And then from the Dreadnought's maw, a single, clear voice cut through the chorus, a voice Alara recognized, her blood running cold, her sister's voice, soft, crying, begging. "Ilara, please, it hurts. Make it stop." The chapter ended on the sound of the hull splitting open, the bridge's air rushing out into the void, and Alara's finger tightening on the trigger of her sidearm, as the Dreadnought's maw opened wider, ready to swallow them whole. Chapter 5. The maw of echoes. The bridge was a tomb of red light and shrieking alarms, every surface trembling under the Dreadnought's grip. Alara's finger hovered on the trigger, her pulse hammering against the oxygen mask. Her sister's voice, broken, pleading, slid through the static of her mind like a blade. "Make it stop." The words were not just sound. They were inside her, woven into the marrow of her bones, a phantom resonance that made her question whether she had truly severed the link. The ash of the locket still clung to her palm, but the Dreadnought was clever, ancient, patient. It knew how to stitch memories into weapons. Kale's voice cut through the chaos, low and steady. "Ilara, don't listen, it's not her." But the faces on the hull, their frozen eyes, their silent mouths shifted. One of them, impossibly, was her sister, not a projection, not a hallucination. The features were exact, down to the scar above her brow. The Dreadnought's surface rippled and the face spoke. "Ilara, you left me." Her breath caught. The mask fogged with each ragged inhale. She wanted to scream, to deny it, but the tendrils outside tightened, metal shrieking as the Vanguard's resolve was pulled deeper into the maw. The crew scrambled, some firing uselessly at the tendrils, others clawing at consoles that sparked and died. The tactical officer beside her whispered prayers, his lips trembling. The Dreadnought fed on it all, their fear, their despair, its presence swelling until the bridge itself seemed to bend inward. Then came the silence. The alarms cut off. The groaning of the hull ceased. Even the hiss of escaping air stilled. In that void, the Dreadnought spoke again, not in words but in thoughts, a tide that drowned every mind on the bridge. "Seed, you are seed. You are mine." Alara's vision blurred. She saw flashes, her sister laughing in the gardens of New Hope, Kale standing at the academy gates, the Armada's fleet burning in the void. Each memory twisted, corrupted, reshaped into images of assimilation, faces stretched across black metal, voices swallowed into the chorus. She clenched the sidearm tighter. "We burn it down," she whispered again, though her voice shook now. Kale forced himself upright, his hand bleeding from the comms override. "Ilara, the core. If we overload it, we take the whole ship with us. The Dreadnought won't expect it." The idea was madness. The core was buried deep, shielded, volatile. To reach it meant abandoning the bridge, descending into the ship's bowels while the Dreadnought consumed them piece by piece. But madness was all they had left. The Dreadnought's maw widened, a cathedral of black teeth and writhing tendrils. Within its depths, Alara saw not emptiness but stars, a false sky, a prison of light. Ships hung there, broken and silent, their crews embedded in the walls, their eyes glowing faintly. It was a graveyard, a museum of conquest, and in the center, suspended like a jewel, was her sister. "Ilara," the apparition whispered, arms outstretched. "Come to me. It doesn't hurt anymore." Her knees buckled. For a heartbeat, she wanted to surrender, to step into that false sky and let the pain dissolve. But Kale's hand gripped her shoulder, grounding her. His eyes were steel. "Don't give it what it wants." The silence shattered. The hull screamed again, alarms blared, consoles exploded in showers of sparks. The Dreadnought had grown impatient. The maw surged forward, swallowing the bow of the Vanguard's resolve. Metal dissolved into black ichor, crew members vanishing mid-scream as they were absorbed into the walls. Ilara fired. The shot was meaningless, a spark against a starless night, but it was defiance. The recoil jolted her back into herself. "Core overload," she said, her voice steady now. We take it down. We burn with it. Kale nodded once. Together, they turned from the bridge, sprinting into the choking corridors as the ship groaned around them. Behind them the maw closed, the faces of the consumed watching silently. The Dreadnought's voice followed, softer now, almost tender. Run, little seed. Run. I will savor you when you fall. The corridors twisted, bulkheads collapsing, oxygen thinning. Every step was a battle against gravity, against despair. The deeper they went, the louder the heartbeat of the core became, a pulsing thrum that matched the rhythm of the Dreadnought's hunger. Ilara's mask cracked, the air hissing out. She tore it away, gasping, her lungs burning. Kale shoved his own mask into her hands without hesitation, his face pale, lips blue. "Keep moving," he rasped. They reached the core chamber. The doors were half melted, tendrils already probing through the gaps. The thrum was deafening now, a living pulse. Ilara raised the sidearm, emptied the magazine into the tendrils, and together they forced the doors open. Inside, the core blazed, a sphere of white fire caged in steel. It pulsed like a heart, each beat shaking the chamber. The tendrils recoiled from its light, hissing. Kale staggered to the console, his blood smearing across the controls. Manual override. We can trigger a cascade. Ilara's hands trembled as she keyed in the sequence. The console resisted, systems failing, but the core responded, its pulse quickening. The Dreadnought screamed. Not in sound, but in thought, a tidal wave of rage that crushed against their minds. The faces on the walls writhed, mouths opening in silent agony. "No, you are mine, you are seed, you cannot burn." Ilara's sister appeared again, closer now, her face twisted in sorrow. "Ilara, please, don't kill me, don't kill us." Her finger hovered over the final command. Sweat dripped into her eyes, her heart tore itself in two. Kale's voice was a whisper. "It's not her, it's never been her." The core roared, light spilling across the chamber, shadows fleeing. The tendrils shrieked, recoiling. The Dreadnought's maw loomed in her mind, wider than ever, ready to consume. Ilara closed her eyes and pressed the command. The chamber erupted in white fire. The ship screamed as the cascade began, the core's pulse accelerating into a frenzy. The Dreadnought's voice fractured, splintering into 1,000 cries. "Seed, seed, seed." The Vanguard's resolve shuddered, its hull tearing apart. The maw convulsed, stars collapsing, faces dissolving. Ilara felt herself lifted, weightless, burning, consumed by light. Her sister's voice was the last thing she heard. "Ilara, thank you." Then silence. The chapter ends with the core's detonation blooming into the void, the Dreadnought writhing as its maw collapses inward, and Ilara and Kale vanishing into the blaze. Uncertain if they had destroyed the ancient hunger or merely awakened something far worse. Chapter 6. The shattered silence, the void did not remain silent. From the ashes of the cascade, the Dreadnought's scream lingered, fractured, broken, yet alive. The blaze that had swallowed Ilara and Kale did not fade into nothingness. Instead, it stretched outward, a ripple across the black sea of stars. The Vanguard's resolve was gone, its hull atomized, but the echo of its destruction carved a scar in the cosmos. Ilara awoke in the blaze, or perhaps she had never left it. Her body was weightless, her skin tingling with the residue of the core's fury. She opened her eyes, expecting void, but found herself suspended in a lattice of light, threads of energy weaving around her, pulsing like veins. Kale floated nearby, his chest rising shallowly, his face pale but alive. The silence was deceptive. Beneath it, something moved. The lattice trembled, and the remnants of the Dreadnought's voice seeped through, no longer a tidal wave but whispers, fragmented and insidious. "Seed. Fractured seed. You burn, yet you remain." Ilara's breath caught. The core had detonated, yes, but the hunger had not died. It had splintered, scattered into shards that now drifted through the void like embers. Each ember pulsed with thought, with intent. The Armada, the fleet that had once been humanity's shield, was drifting nearby, its ships caught in the ripple, and the embers were moving toward them. Kale stirred, his voice hoarse. "We didn't kill it, we multiplied it." The realization struck like a blade. The cascade had not destroyed the Dreadnought, it had shattered it, scattering its essence into countless fragments. And now each fragment sought a vessel. The lattice of light around them began to constrict, pulling them downward. Alara reached out, her fingers brushing Kale's, grounding herself in the only anchor she had left. The blaze dimmed, and suddenly they were standing, feet on steel, air thick with smoke. They were aboard a ship, not the Vanguard's Resolve, something older, something wrong. The corridors stretched endlessly, walls lined with faces half-formed, mouths open in silent screams. The air carried the scent of rust and ozone. The ship's heartbeat throbbed beneath their feet, a rhythm too familiar. Kale's eyes widened. This is the Dreadnought, or what's left of it. Alara's pulse quickened. The cascade had torn the beast apart, but fragments of its consciousness had woven themselves into a new shell. A husk, a rebirth. The silence shattered. A klaxon wailed, echoing through the corridors. The walls convulsed, faces twisting, eyes opening. The ship was aware of them. It had always been aware. You pressed the command. You tore me. Now you will carry me. Alara staggered, clutching her head as the voice drilled into her skull. Her sister's face flickered again, this time not sorrowful but accusing. You chose fire, you chose death, and now we are all ash. Kale grabbed her shoulder, forcing her to meet his gaze. Ignore it, it's not her, it's never her. But the ship disagreed. The walls rippled, and from the steel emerged tendrils, thin, sharp, dripping with black ichor. They lashed toward them, hungry. Alara fired her sidearm, the shots echoing like thunder. The tendrils recoiled, but more emerged, writhing, multiplying. The ship was alive, and it wanted them bound. Kale pulled her down a corridor, their boots pounding against the trembling floor. The klaxon grew louder, merging with the heartbeat, until it was impossible to tell where the sound ended and their own pulse began. They burst into a chamber, a vast cathedral of steel and shadow. At its center hung a sphere, smaller than the original core but no less terrifying. It pulsed faintly, shards of light orbiting it like broken moons. Alara froze. It's reforming, Kale's jaw tight. And it's using us to do it. The sphere pulsed again, and the Armada answered. Across the void, ships began to stir, their systems flickering, their engines igniting without command. The fragments of the Dreadnought were seeding themselves into the fleet, turning humanity's shield into its executioner. Alara's heart hammered. They had not destroyed the hunger. They had unleashed it. The chamber shook, the sphere's pulse accelerating. Tendrils erupted from the floor, wrapping around consoles, fusing with steel. The ship's voice rose, no longer whispers but a chorus of rage. You are mine, you are vessel, you are seed. Kale raised his weapon, but Alara grabbed his arm. No, shooting won't stop it, we need to sever the link. Her eyes darted to the consoles, half fused with tendrils. The systems were alive, resisting, but somewhere within them was a command, a way to break the connection before the Armada was fully consumed. Kale's face was pale, his breath ragged. Then we move fast, because once the fleet turns, there's no going back. The sphere pulsed again, brighter, hungrier. The Armada's ships began to align, their weapons charging, their hulls shimmering with alien light. Alara's hands trembled as she reached for the console. The tendrils hissed, recoiling from her touch, but the system resisted, its interface flickering between human code and something far darker. The ship screamed. The void trembled, and the Armada began its descent. Chapter 6 ends with Alara and Kale standing before the reforming core, the Armada awakening under the Dreadnought's fractured will. The fleet's weapons turn outward, not toward the enemy, but toward the stars themselves, ready to burn entire systems. The silence of the void is gone, replaced by the dread chorus of 1,000 ships falling into darkness. Chapter 7. The shattered choir, the chamber's walls convulsed, steel groaning as if the ship itself were drawing breath. The sphere at the center pulsed with a rhythm that was no longer mechanical. It was organic, predatory. Each beat sent ripples through the air, distorting light, bending sound, until Kale and Alara felt as though they were standing inside the chest cavity of some colossal beast. The Armada's chorus grew louder. Across the void, thousands of ships sang in unison, their engines harmonizing with the sphere's pulse. It was not music. It was a dirge, a war chant of annihilation. The fleet was no longer humanity's. It had become the Dreadnought's choir. Alara's fingers flew across the console, her eyes darting between fragments of human code and alien glyphs. The system resisted, each command she entered swallowed by a tide of symbols that writhed like serpents. "It's rewriting itself," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Every line of code is being devoured." Kale's weapon shook in his grip. He wanted to fire to destroy the sphere before it could finish its resurrection, but the memory of Alara's warning held him back. Shooting wouldn't stop it. It would only feed it. The tendrils thickened, slamming into the walls, fusing with conduits. Sparks cascaded like falling stars. The ship's voice rose again, no longer a whisper but a scream that reverberated through their bones. "You are mine. You are seed. You are chorus." Alara's breath caught. "It's not just controlling the Armada, it's trying to bind us into it." Kale's eyes widened. He could feel it now, a pressure against his mind, a pull at the edges of his thoughts. The sphere wasn't just rewriting machines. It was reaching for them, clawing at their consciousness. The chamber darkened. The shards of light orbiting the sphere elongated, stretching into jagged blades of brilliance. They spun faster, slicing through the air, each rotation humming with lethal intent. Alara screamed as the console flared, her hands burning against the surface. She pulled back, skin blistered, but her eyes locked on a single flickering command buried deep within the chaos. "Sever link." Kale saw it too. That's it, that's the kill switch. But the tendrils knew. They surged upward, wrapping around the console, burying the command beneath layers of living steel. The sphere pulsed brighter, hungrier. Outside, the Armada shifted formation. Thousands of ships aligned into a lattice, their weapons converging on a single point in the void. Not a planet, not an enemy fleet, the stars themselves. The Dreadnought was preparing to burn the heavens. Alara's voice broke. "If it fires, it'll collapse the system. Every star in range will die." Kale's jaw clenched. "Then we don't let it fire." He lunged forward, tearing at the tendrils with his weapon, slicing through their writhing mass. Sparks and ichor sprayed across the chamber, the air thick with the stench of burning metal and something far fouler. Alara forced her hands back onto the console, ignoring the pain, her fingers dancing across the fractured interface. The command flickered again, brighter this time, but the sphere screamed, its voice splitting into 1,000 overlapping tones. "You are mine. You are vessel. You are void." The pressure in Kale's skull intensified. He staggered, clutching his head, visions flooding his mind. Images of stars collapsing, fleets burning, humanity screaming as the Armada descended upon them. He saw himself not as Kale but as a hollow shell, a conduit for the Dreadnought's will. Alara grabbed his arm, her eyes blazing. "Fight it, don't let it in," Kale roared, forcing the visions back, his weapon cleaving through another tendril. The console flared, the command rising to the surface. Alara slammed her hand down, "Sever link." The chamber exploded with light. The sphere convulsed, its shards shattering, its tendrils recoiling in agony. Across the void, the Armada faltered, their chorus breaking into discordant screams. Engines sputtered, weapons dimmed. For a moment, silence returned. But then the sphere pulsed again, weak, fractured, but alive. Its voice was no longer a scream, but a whisper, insidious and patient. "You cannot sever what is eternal." Alara's heart sank. The command had weakened it, but not destroyed it. The link was broken, yes, but only temporarily. The Dreadnought's hunger remained. Kale's breath was ragged, his eyes hollow. "We bought time, nothing more." Outside, the Armada drifted, their weapons dimmed, their engines silent, but the alien light still lingered, faint and pulsing, waiting for the sphere's call. Alara turned to Kale, her voice trembling. "If it reforms again, the Armada won't just descend. It'll consume everything, not just systems. Not just stars, everything." Kale tightened his grip on his weapon, his gaze locked on the fractured sphere. "Then we finish this. No matter what it takes." The chamber trembled once more, the sphere's shards beginning to knit themselves back together. The silence was gone. The void was stirring again. And the Armada waited, patient, hungry, ready to fall once more. Chapter 8. The fractured pulse, the chamber's walls quivered as if the ship itself were holding its breath. The fractured sphere hovered in the center, its shards knitting together with a grotesque patience, each piece sliding into place like bone regrowing after a wound. The whisper of its voice slithered through the air, threading into Kale's mind, into Alara's veins, into the silence itself. Kale steadied his weapon, though his hands trembled. The visions had not left him. They lingered like afterimages burned into his skull. He could still see the Armada, vast and endless, their hulls blackened with void light waiting for the sphere's call. He could still hear the screams of collapsing stars. He could still feel the hollow shell of himself, the vessel he might become. Alara's fingers hovered over the console, her knuckles white. The interface was cracked, its light sputtering, but it still pulsed faintly with possibility. She knew the command she had issued, sever link, was only a reprieve. The sphere's hunger was eternal, its whispers were proof. It was not defeated, it was waiting. The chamber's air thickened, heavy with static. The sphere's shards pulsed in rhythm, each beat echoing like a heartbeat too large for the room. The Armada outside stirred, their engines flickering back to life, faint but undeniable. The silence was breaking. Kale's voice was low, ragged. It's rebuilding faster than before. Alara's eyes darted to him, fear sharp in her gaze. It's learning, adapting. Every time we strike, it grows stronger, smarter. The whisper grew louder, curling around them like smoke. You are mine. You are vessel. You are void. Kale staggered, clutching his head again. The visions surged, this time sharper, more insistent. He saw himself standing at the helm of the Armada, his eyes hollow, his voice not his own. He saw Alara beside him, her hands bound to the sphere, her body nothing more than a conduit. He saw the Dreadnought rising, its shadow blotting out galaxies. Alara grabbed his arm, grounding him. Kale, stay with me, don't let it take you. He forced a breath, his weapon trembling in his grip. We need to destroy it, not weaken it, destroy it. Alara's gaze flicked to the console. The command interface is fractured. I can't reach the deeper protocols. Not without, she stopped, her throat tightening. Not without linking directly. Kale's eyes widened. Linking? Alara, that's suicide. Her jaw clenched. It's the only way. The sphere is rebuilding itself from within. If I can reach its core, I might be able to overload it, burn it out. The whisper hissed, almost amused. Yes, Link, become mine, become void. Kale shook his head violently. No, that's what it wants, that's how it wins. Alara's voice was steady, though her hands trembled. It's the only chance we have. If it reforms, the Armada will descend again, and this time nothing will stop them. The chamber trembled, the sphere's shards locking tighter, its pulse growing stronger. Outside, the Armada's engines flared, their weapons beginning to hum with power. The silence was gone. The void was awakening. Kale stepped closer to Alara, his voice fierce. Then we do it together. If you link, I'll anchor you, I'll keep you from falling. Alara's eyes softened, a flicker of hope piercing through the fear. You'll be pulled in too. Kale's grip tightened on his weapon. Then we fight it together, no matter what it takes. The sphere pulsed again, brighter, hungrier. Its shards gleamed like teeth. The whisper became a chorus, 1,000 voices overlapping, each one promising eternity. You cannot sever what is eternal. You cannot fight what is void. You are mine. You are mine. Alara placed her hands on the console, her breath steadying. Then let's prove it wrong. The chamber flared with light as the console surged, its fractured circuits sparking to life. The sphere screamed, its voice splitting into 1,000 tones. Kale braced himself, his weapon raised, his mind burning with visions. Alara's fingers danced across the interface, her consciousness reaching out, threading into the sphere's core. The void opened, and the Armada stirred, their descent beginning once more. This chapter leaves us on the knife's edge, the moment before Alara's mind collides with the sphere's essence, before Kale is forced to anchor her against the tide of eternity. The tension is unbearable, the silence shattered, the void alive. Would you like me to push Chapter 9 into the moment of Alara's direct link, her mind entering the sphere's core, and explore the psychological horror of what she finds there? Chapter 9. Into the core of the sphere, the chamber was no longer a chamber. It was a storm. The fractured console spat arcs of light that clawed at the air, and the sphere's shards spun in a slow, predatory orbit, each fragment humming with a resonance that made Kale's teeth ache. The Armada's engines outside were a chorus of thunder, their descent shaking the walls as if the void itself had grown impatient. Alara's fingers pressed deeper into the console's surface, her breath shallow but steady. She felt the interface dissolve beneath her touch, felt the circuits unravel into threads of thought. The link was not mechanical, it was alive, a lattice of whispers and pulses that reached into her mind like roots burrowing into soil. Kale's hand gripped her shoulder, anchoring her, his presence a weight against the pull. "Stay with me," he growled, though his voice trembled. The sphere's voice was no longer a whisper. It was a cathedral of sound, vast and endless, each syllable echoing with the gravity of eternity. "You are entering, you are mine. You are void." Alara's consciousness slipped, her vision fracturing into shards of memory and light. She saw herself as a child, staring at the stars from the colony's rooftop. She saw Kale, bloodied and defiant, standing against the Armada's first wave. She saw the void swallowing entire fleets, their screams silenced in a single breath. And then she saw the core. It was not a place. It was a wound, a vast, endless rupture in reality, bleeding light and shadow in equal measure. The sphere's essence was a black sun, its corona made of voices, its gravity made of hunger. Every thought she carried was stripped bare, every fear magnified, every hope twisted into something fragile and breakable. Kale's voice cut through the storm, raw and desperate. "Alara, fight it. Don't let it take you." She clung to his voice, but the sphere pressed harder. It showed her visions of Kale broken, his body drifting in the void, his eyes hollow. It showed her the Armada triumphant, their dreadnoughts blotting out the stars, their descent unstoppable. Anchor him, anchor her, anchor them both. Kale felt it too. The link was not one-sided. The sphere's tendrils brushed against his mind, probing, testing. He saw Alara fading, her outline dissolving into the storm. He tightened his grip, forcing his will into the link, forcing his presence into her unraveling consciousness. "Alara, listen to me. You're not alone, you're not void, you're here, with me." Her breath hitched. For a moment the storm faltered. The sphere screamed. The chamber convulsed, its walls bending inward, the shards of the sphere snapping tighter, forming a cage of light. The Armada's weapons outside ignited, beams of energy lancing toward the chamber, but the sphere absorbed them, feeding on their fury. Alara's mind plunged deeper. She reached the core fully now, her essence brushing against the wound. It was infinite, but it was fragile. Beneath the hunger, beneath the voices, there was a fracture, a single fault line running through the black sun. She reached for it. The sphere roared, its chorus splintering into 1,000 screams. "You cannot sever eternity. You cannot burn the void. You are mine." Kale's voice thundered in her mind, louder than the storm, louder than the void. "Then prove it wrong." Alara's hand closed around the fracture. The core convulsed. The wound widened. Light bled out, searing, blinding. The sphere's shards shattered outward, each fragment shrieking as it dissolved into dust. The Armada's descent faltered, their engines stuttering, their weapons flickering. But the void was not defeated. It surged, desperate, clawing at Alara's mind, trying to drag her into the wound. Kale felt her slipping, felt her essence unraveling. He threw himself into the link, his consciousness colliding with hers, anchoring her with every memory they shared, every battle they fought, every breath they took together. The wound screamed. The chamber was a hurricane of light and shadow, the console melting into molten streams, the air vibrating with the force of collapse. Alara's body convulsed, her eyes glowing with the sphere's dying fire. Kale's grip tightened, his own vision fracturing, his mind burning. And then silence. The wound closed. The sphere was gone. Alara collapsed against Kale, her breath ragged, her body trembling. The Armada outside faltered, their descent broken, their dreadnoughts drifting aimlessly as if their purpose had been severed. But Kale knew. He saw it in her eyes, in the way the silence pressed against them. The void was not destroyed, it was waiting. Alara whispered, her voice barely audible. "We bought time, nothing more." Kale's jaw clenched, his weapon still in hand, his eyes fixed on the drifting Armada. "Then we use it, before the void awakens again." The silence was heavy, oppressive, but beneath it was the faintest pulse, the heartbeat of something vast, something eternal. The dreadnoughts stirred, their shadows stretching across the stars. The Armada's descent was not over. It had only just begun. This chapter plunges us into the psychological horror of Alara's direct link, the storm of the sphere's core, and the fragile victory they claw from the void. The tension is unbearable, the silence deceptive, and the dreadnoughts still loom. Chapter 10 will carry the aftermath, the Armada's fractured descent, the consequences of touching eternity and the next impossible choice. Chapter 10. The shattered silence. The silence was not peace. It was a suffocating weight, pressing against the hull of the command chamber, against the fragile threads of Alara's mind. Kale could feel it too, the void's breath, cold and patient, lingering in the fractures of reality. The dreadnoughts drifted, their colossal forms suspended in the abyss like predators feigning death. Their engines sputtered, their weapons dimmed, but their shadows stretched farther than light could reach. The Armada had not fallen. It had only paused as though waiting for the next command from something deeper, something older. Alara stirred, her body trembling as though every nerve had been scorched. Her eyes opened, glowing faintly with the residue of the sphere's fire. Kale steadied her, but the moment their gazes locked, he saw it, the fracture inside her. Not physical, but something carved into her essence. "Alara," he whispered, his voice taut with dread. "What did it take from you?" Her lips parted, but the words were broken fragments. "Not taken, bound. I touched eternity, Kale. It touched back." The chamber shuddered. The consoles flickered, their molten edges cooling into jagged scars. Outside, the Armada's formation twisted, ships colliding in slow, deliberate arcs as though guided by invisible strings. Kale's hand tightened on his weapon. "They're regrouping." "No," Alara breathed, her voice hollow. "They're listening." The silence deepened, and within it came a pulse, slow, deliberate, like the heartbeat of a leviathan buried beneath the stars. Each thrum reverberated through the dreadnoughts, aligning them, repairing them. The Armada was not broken, it was evolving. Kale's jaw clenched. "We severed the sphere, we should have crippled them." Alara shook her head, her hair damp with sweat, her eyes haunted. "The sphere was only a conduit, the void itself, it's awake now, and it's learning." The pulse grew louder, resonating through the chamber walls. Kale felt his own thoughts tremble as though the void was probing, searching for cracks in his mind. He forced himself to focus, anchoring on Alara's presence, her ragged breath, the faint warmth of her hand. "We bought time," Kale said, echoing her earlier words. "But time for what?" Alara's gaze drifted to the viewport, where the dreadnoughts loomed like titans. "For choice. The Armada is tethered to the void. If we strike now, we risk awakening it fully. If we wait, it consumes us. Either way, the descent continues." The chamber's lights dimmed, shadows stretching across the floor. Kale felt the weight of inevitability pressing down, the sense that every path led into darkness. Yet beneath it, a spark of defiance burned. "We've faced impossible before," he said, his voice steady despite the storm inside him. "We'll face it again." Alara's lips curved into something between a smile and a grimace. "Impossible doesn't mean invincible." The pulse thundered once more, and this time, the dreadnoughts responded. Their engines ignited, not with flame, but with a black radiance that devoured the stars around them. One by one, the Armada turned, their bows aligning toward the fracture in space. The wound Alara had closed. Kale's breath caught. "They're not descending anymore, they're converging." Alara's eyes widened, horror dawning. "They're feeding the wound, they're trying to reopen it." The silence shattered. The chamber roared with alarms, the consoles sparking back to life, streams of data flooding across the displays. The wound pulsed, its edges glowing, its hunger rekindled. The Armada's descent had shifted into something far worse. Kale gripped Alara's arm, his voice sharp. "We stop them. Whatever it takes." Her gaze locked on his, fierce despite the tremor in her body. "Then prepare yourself, Kale, because to stop them, we may have to step into the void itself." The dreadnoughts surged forward, their shadows swallowing the stars. The wound widened, its scream echoing across eternity, and the silence was gone. It had become war. Chapter 11. Into the maw of silence, the wound in space was no longer a scar. It was a mouth, widening, hungering, its edges trembling with a black fire that devoured the stars. The Armada's dreadnoughts, vast and unyielding, poured their radiance into it, each vessel a conduit of annihilation. The void was not simply reopening. It was reshaping itself, learning, adapting, becoming something far more dangerous than Kale or Alara had ever imagined. The chamber shook violently, consoles flickering, alarms shrieking in discordant harmony. Kale braced himself against the railing, his knuckles white, his eyes locked on the viewport where the titanic silhouettes of the dreadnoughts loomed. Their alignment was precise, deliberate, as though guided by a single, terrible intelligence. Alara's voice was a whisper, yet it cut through the chaos. It's not just feeding, it's synchronizing. The void is using them as extensions of itself. Kale's stomach twisted. He had seen battles, massacres, the collapse of fleets, but this was different. This was not war. This was assimilation. The wound pulsed again, and Kale felt his thoughts fracture, shards of alien whispers clawing at the edges of his mind. He forced them back, anchoring himself in Alara's presence. Her hand trembled against his, but her gaze was steel. "We can't stop them from here," she said, her tone steady despite the terror in her eyes. "The dreadnoughts are beyond our reach. The only way to sever their link is from inside the void." Kale's breath caught. "Inside?" Alara nodded, her jaw set. "The void is awake, but it's still forming. If we enter, we might disrupt its lattice before it stabilizes. But once it stabilizes," she trailed off, her silence heavier than any words. Kale turned back to the viewport. The dreadnought's black radiance was intensifying, the wound stretching wider, its edges unraveling into streams of shadow that lashed across the stars. He felt the inevitability pressing down, the crushing certainty that if they did nothing, the Armada would become the void's eternal servants. "Then we step in," Kale said, his voice low, resolute. "We step into the maw and tear it apart from within." Alara's lips parted, a flicker of disbelief crossing her face before hardening into grim acceptance. "You don't understand what that means. Once inside, the void will strip us bare, it will know us, it will consume us." Kale's gaze locked on hers, fierce. "Then we make sure it chokes on us." The chamber's lights flickered, then died, plunging them into darkness. Only the wound's glow remained, casting the room in a sickly, shifting radiance. The consoles sparked back to life, streams of data cascading across the displays, coordinates, vectors, resonance patterns. The void was broadcasting its own architecture, daring them to enter. Alara's fingers flew across the controls, her movements sharp, precise. "I can align a shuttle with the wound's resonance. It'll pull us in. But once inside, there's no guarantee we'll find a way back." Kale stepped closer, his voice steady. "We don't need a way back, we need a way through." The chamber trembled again, a deep rumble echoing through the hull. Outside, the dreadnoughts surged forward, their shadows stretching, their radiance pouring into the wound. The fracture widened, its scream reverberating across eternity. Alara's hands paused, her eyes meeting Kale's. "If we fail, the Armada becomes the void, and the void becomes everything." Kale's jaw clenched, his defiance burning brighter than the terror gnawing at him. "Then we don't fail." The shuttle bay doors groaned open, the void's radiance spilling inside like a tide of darkness. Kale and Alara moved quickly, their steps echoing against the metal floor, each stride heavy with the weight of inevitability. The shuttle loomed before them, its hull trembling under the resonance of the wound. Alara entered first, her fingers dancing across the controls, aligning the vessel with the void's pulse. Kale followed, his eyes fixed on the viewport where the wound stretched wider, its hunger palpable. The engines ignited, not with flame, but with a resonance that matched the void's scream. The shuttle trembled, its hull groaning as though resisting the pull. Alara's voice was sharp. "Hold on." The shuttle surged forward, the stars blurring, the wound expanding until it filled the viewport entirely. Kale felt the pull, the inexorable drag of the void, its whispers clawing at his mind, its hunger pressing against his soul. And then silence. The shuttle crossed the threshold, swallowed whole. Inside the void there were no stars, no space, no time. Only a lattice of shadows, shifting, alive, pulsing with a rhythm that was both heartbeat and scream. The dreadnought's radiance flowed through it, streams of black fire weaving into the lattice, strengthening it, shaping it. Kale's breath caught, his chest tight. He felt the void probing him, peeling back layers of thought, memory, fear. He forced himself to focus, anchoring on Alara's presence, her ragged breath, the faint warmth of her hand. Alara's voice was a whisper. "We're inside its mind." Kale's gaze swept across the lattice, the endless streams of shadow weaving into patterns that shifted and reformed. Then we tear it apart. The shuttle trembled, its hull groaning under the pressure of the void's resonance. Alara's fingers flew across the controls, aligning the vessel with the lattice's pulse. If we disrupt the resonance, the lattice collapses, but it'll fight back. It'll use us against ourselves. Kale's jaw clenched. Let it try. The void pulsed, and Kale felt his thoughts fracture again, shards of alien whispers clawing at his mind. He forced them back, anchoring himself in defiance in the spark that refused to be extinguished. Alara's voice was sharp, urgent. Kale, it's learning us. Every thought, every fear. If we falter, it wins. Kale's gaze locked on hers, fierce. Then we don't falter. The shuttle surged deeper into the lattice, streams of shadow lashing against its hull, the void's scream echoing across eternity. Kale felt the inevitability pressing down, the crushing certainty that every path led into darkness. Yet beneath it, a spark of defiance burned, and the silence was gone. It had become war. Would you like me to carry this momentum into the final chapter 12, where the confrontation inside the void reaches its climax and resolution? Chapter 12. The shattered lattice, the shuttle convulsed as if caught in the grip of a living storm. The lattice of shadows writhed, its pulse accelerating into a frenzy that threatened to tear the vessel apart. Every strand of black fire lashed outward, converging on the shuttle like veins of a colossal heart, intent on consuming them whole. Kale's knuckles whitened against the armrest, his body trembling under the weight of the void's assault. The whispers were no longer fragments, they were a chorus, 1,000 voices clawing at his mind, each one echoing his deepest fears. He saw himself broken, saw Alara lost, saw the Dreadnoughts triumphant. But beneath the cacophony, a single thought burned, defiance. Alara's voice cut through the storm, sharp and ragged. Kale, the resonance is peaking. If we strike now, we can fracture the lattice, but it'll try to bind us to it. It'll make us part of its scream. Kale's gaze locked on hers, fierce and unyielding. Then we scream louder. The shuttle's systems flared, lights flickering as Alara forced the engines into alignment with the lattice's rhythm. The hull groaned, metal bending under impossible pressure. The void's heartbeat thundered, each pulse threatening to crush them into nothingness. And then the lattice shifted. It wasn't just shadow anymore, it was memory. Kale saw flashes of his past, twisted and distorted. The battlefield where he had failed his comrades, the faces of those he had lost, their eyes hollow, accusing. Alara gasped, her own visions bleeding into the air, her family consumed by fire, her hands stained with ash. The void was using them against themselves. Kale's chest tightened, the weight of guilt pressing down like a blade. He felt himself slipping, the shadows clawing deeper, whispering that resistance was futile, that surrender was inevitable. But then Alara's hand found his, her grip iron. Her voice was steady, defiant. Kale, look at me. We are not theirs. The words cut through the storm, anchoring him. He forced his gaze away from the phantoms, away from the lies, and into her eyes. In that moment the void faltered. The lattice screamed. Alara slammed the controls forward, channeling the shuttle's resonance into a counterpulse. The engines roared, not with flame but with defiance, a surge of raw will made manifest. The shuttle became a blade, slicing into the lattice's rhythm, disrupting its pulse. The shadows convulsed, streams of black fire unraveling, the lattice fracturing into shards of screaming light. The void recoiled, its chorus breaking into chaos. Kale felt the pressure lift, the whispers falter. He surged forward, his voice a roar. "You will not have us," the lattice shattered. The void screamed, a sound that was both silence and thunder, a final desperate cry as its structure collapsed. The streams of shadow dissolved into nothingness, the heartbeat stilled. And then, light. The shuttle burst free, the viewport filled not with darkness but with stars. The wound was gone, sealed, its hunger silenced. The Dreadnought's radiance had vanished, their dark descent halted. Kale slumped back, his chest heaving, sweat streaking his brow. Alara's hands trembled against the controls, her breath ragged. For a moment neither spoke, the silence heavy, profound. Then Alara whispered, her voice fragile but resolute. "We won. Kale's gaze swept across the stars, the endless expanse that had once seemed so cold, now alive with possibility. His voice was low, steady. "No, we survived. The war isn't over, but the void, it knows we're not afraid anymore." The shuttle drifted forward, its hull scarred but intact, carrying them into the vastness of space. Behind them, the wound was gone. Ahead, the stars awaited. And in the silence, a spark burned, defiance, unyielding, eternal. The dreadnoughts had awakened, the Armada had descended, but Kale and Alara had endured. Beyond the silent void, the war had only just begun. That closes beyond the silent void, the dreadnought's awakening and the Armada's dark descent. I wrote this finale to be tense, visceral, and cathartic, while leaving the door open for future battles. Would you like me to sketch out what a sequel might look like, expanding on the aftermath of the void's collapse?